Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Turned Out a Punk Classics, a show where we take old episodes of Turned Out a Punk that have been lost from the internet and return them to their previous glory by sticking them back on the feed. You can find this podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and all other forms of social media. Well, that's pretty much it. At Turned Out a Punk. You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Left for Damian. I play in a band. More information can be found at fuckedup.cc. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy another TOAP classic.
For me, it's a big thrill because...
You're easy to please. We like that.
Well, no, not yet. Trust me, now it's going to get hard. But,
what's getting hard?
This interview. Now the trick math interview. Questions and everything. But, no, because, like, I've never had a whole band on.
Great.
And number two, this is like the band that I want to be.
No, you're so nice.
like I really...
We'll have to get to the bottom of that.
Well, but we can go through and you can go and check the facts on this. I've said this in other interviews. Like, the Melvins are the band's band in a real way where you can find... and
you mean they don't make money?
Well, yeah. That's definitely
never
my
had any
case.
success.
You never want to be the band's band. You never want to be the guy that's really good at taking a punch.
No, but you want to be the band
iron jaw
that finds a way to age without becoming an embarrassment. And like so many bands, and I know, especially in punk, wind up becoming the embarrassment. And this is, I don't know why I'm doing this on the podcast because it's going to be really awkward, me just making you feel awkward right now telling you all this, but...
We're used to feeling awkward.
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, but anyway. But this isn't about me. It's about you guys. And I guess since there's three, we'll go kind of down the line.
Whose podcast is it?
Mine.
Then it's kind of about you.
Yeah, it's kind of about you.
Ultimately, I find my way to weasel myself back into every episode.
Ultimately, it's all about you.
Ultimately, it's like a Mark Maron thing where really I could be interviewing the president. I'm still going to put myself back in there.
Of course. Why not?
Duh. But I guess I start them all off the same way, which is, how'd you get into punk?
Jeff? This is Jeff.
Well, as I was saying before this started, I went to shows at the Metroplex and saw punk rock bands, but when I started playing music, I'm 47 now. I'm the baby of the band by 3 days. When I joined the Butts, I was 17 years old, and punk rock technically was not the same thing. I was 76 to maybe 81 to me is kind of punk rock, and everything after that was, inspired by the attitude or inspired by the tones, or you don't need to have a huge equipment budget, not like garage rock, which I can't stand because I've done sound and that means someone's speaker doesn't work, and that's a great sound. I mean, like some that work, but you have PV Classic instead of a Marshall, Pro Lead or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it was the attitude was there. It's just, circle jerks and but the people I grew up with in Atlanta, we got everything like 4 years later. Anyways, I remember TSOL showing up, and they showed up in a limousine, and we were all bummed out. But we didn't know at that time it was actually cheaper to take a limousine than it was to take a cab when you got a bunch of guitars. So, JFA skateboarding down the street, but everything was like 4 years afterwards. We got everything. We had a great college radio out of the Georgia Tech and Georgia State both.
Do you remember the first time you came across? Because the Pistols would have played Atlanta. I guess you would have been too young to see that.
Yeah, that was the first show at the Agora.
You would have been too young to see that.
I would have been 9 years old then.
Yeah.
So?
Buzz would have been 22.
I'd have been 32.
32. Sorry, my math ain't that good right now.
But
it's a long time ago.
What was your first? Do you remember the first time you actually came across it as a genre?
Yeah. I mean, me and my friend Fred, who just passed away, we the guy first did acid with the guy we pierced our ears with a safety pin and an ice cube and a potato, and we thought we were doing punk rock stuff. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we got it because of the radio stations down there. Georgia State had a great one, WARAS, and then Georgia Tech radio was all right. And so I remember, hearing Ism and Flipper and just tons of shit that I never would have heard if the college radio wouldn't have been there, for me, which I thought was great because, when you're young, you're looking for something that's a little bit different, and that really just struck a chord.
How many Buzz?
You get laid too.
Not in my experience with punk rock.
Oh, really?
No, I kept my virginity till I was in my mid-20s. Hence why I have such a good record collection.
Yeah, but you're making up for it now.
I'm making a lot of babies. Thank goodness I didn't make these mistakes younger in life.
We call them summer kids. Summer here, summer there.
Summer there.
That's right.
I like the fact that your parents, when you were 17 years old, said, join in a band, huh, Butthole Surfers?
I left home when I was 15, and my pops, bless his heart, came down there to the punk rock club, and they said, Pinkus, your dad's here. And I looked at him, he came up to me, and he said, I could take you home if I wanted. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, you take care of yourself. And they drove off. I was living already by myself at 15. So
he said, I could take you home if I wanted, but I
didn't
don't want it.
Yeah. No, I let my folks. That wasn't that. Yeah. And so if you can't live under your folks' rules and they want you out from under their roof, you hear that and you're like, do 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 do, because we just got those push button phones, and and then all of a sudden the next day I know my mom's holding on to my leg while I'm going out the patio door, to leave the golden ghettos where I grew up.
Yeah.
You made the right choice.
I think so. Look where I am now.
Yeah.
I can't even afford sleeves.
No.
Actually, it's open carry in Texas now.
And those aren't.
So these guns are.
These guns are loaded.
Those aren't tattoos. It's a skin disease. It's a skin disease.
So when did you make your way to Texas?
With the Butthole Surfers.
Well, with the Butthole, you met them when they came to Atlanta.
Yeah, we drove around a lot and stayed on people's floors.
Yeah.
3 years, wasn't it?
About 3 years, and we stayed as long as we could. We always had someone was always sick. But we slept on people's floors until they would find us another show in another town.
Go.
They were like, "Hey, my friend Sandy says there's a place y'all can play in North Carolina." So
Really?
we would sleep on their floor until they'd kick us out.
So you're saying
we were good house guests though.
You're saying the Butthole Surfers were kind of like the ring tape. You had to give it to someone else.
Ringworm.
Yeah.
A ringworm.
Yeah, a little bit like that.
Like the movie Ring, The Ring, yeah.
Yeah, the ring, like the movie Ring.
The Ring, yeah.
But yeah, those guys were already around doing it, 10 years older than me. They experienced a lot more of the punk rock, and I don't think someone brought up the term grunge. That really, they didn't like that term. Punk rock, I don't think they ever considered themselves punk rock. But playing music that would piss off punk rockers is kind of punk rock.
That's the most punk rock.
And Meat Puppets, like I said, playing tumbling tumbleweeds in front of a Black Flag crowd naked is another kind of way to piss off some people.
It worked.
It
was really good.
People that get they don't know why they're uncomfortable and it makes them mad and then they want to throw shit.
And people don't understand that back then there wasn't the early 80s version of the Warped Tour. None of that was fucking happening.
No, that wasn't going to happen at all.
No way.
No, that was called a benefit.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I guess the equivalent is that anti-Reagan tour with DRI and MDC. It's like the Warped Tour.
But
we played Rock Against Reagan.
Rock Against Reagan. That's
we played that.
Yeah.
And I remember Skeeter got arrested from Scream for weed, and they were up on stage. They were supposed to play, and they're like, "We need $200 to get him out of jail." And the Beach Boys were playing down the way. And it was really a bad experience. I didn't dig that one at all. But the acid didn't help either.
But now though.
Then the cops all came in after the Beach Boys were done, and the helicopters and the horses, and it was muddy, and someone stole the lid to my amp, and I had to carry that.
Surf was up. That's why.
Surf was up.
Surf was up.
The cops all just came right from the Beach Boys show.
But the big difference with that show is that none of those bands were riding around in buses the way they do on the Warped Tour.
Yeah.
No,
not at all. No,
they might have been taken away in a prison bus.
We didn't have AC.
You were not riding the bus.
We didn't have a radio except for a jam box.
Did you guys have a shitty van that always broke down like we did?
Ours was pretty good because we bought an old Dodge.
Well, we had an old Dodge. It wasn't pretty good.
Oh, ours was good.
Broke down every 3 feet.
Well, we called it court low. It was always a court low. No matter when you checked it.
A court love? It never worked.
So
yeah, exactly.
So, how about you got on the opposite end of the country? How did you first hear punk rock?
I got into punk rock solely because of Cream magazine.
Okay.
And that was in the 70s, long before I was ever able to see a show. Mm-hmm. So I was really into bands like, I was really into David Bowie, stuff like that. And I was just talking to Brian about that, listening to stuff like Diamond Dog's David Bowie album in like 76. I didn't know one person other than me that had any idea any of that stuff. So it was like that for a long time for me. Long time.
Where'd you find those records? Because
I mail ordered them.
Yeah, that was the thing, I mean, around where we're from, there was maybe one record store. You know, actually, where you'd buy
Bilbo
records
Baggins.
at.
They hated me every time I went in there. They thought I was trying to steal stuff.
Really?
Bilbo Baggins is
It was a record store.
a Lord of the Rings
Imagine
reference,
it.
right?
Imagine it.
You know, what was super
This
cool on the
then.
Savior was Roar cassettes. That was a little.
Well, but where I'd buy records in Aberdeen was like at the Safeway. You know, the drugstore would have like a rack of records, but no punk rock records at all. So
No.
Anyway, I'll let him.
No, there was no punk rock
Finish it.
records. I got into that solely because of pictures in Cream magazine of bands like the Clash or the Sex Pistols. Weird bands. Like, you'd see a picture of the Jam or whatever. I was really into rock music, like Aerosmith, Ted Nugent. I liked all that kind of stuff, and it really, to me, wasn't a big stretch to listen to the Sex Pistols album when that came out. So I bought that like right about the time it came out. What people don't understand now is I would have killed to have the internet when I was a kid. I would have killed to be able to look at live videos of bands from the 60s. Blue Cheer. I'll see what Blue Cheer looks like. Boom, there it is.
Yeah.
For me, ordering a record was, when I was a teenager, 13, 12 years old, giving my mom money, my mom giving me a check written out to this place, and I'm not kidding you, waiting months for it to get here. Because at that time, the United States Postal Service had a monopoly on that kind of stuff, and they were in no hurry to deliver you anything. So I would send it away, and 3 months later, you'd get the record.
So where were you ordering the records from?
Off of like mail order lists and
Okay.
things like Cream magazine would have a list of things. There'd be like somebody advertising selling records, or you could mail order and get a catalog that would have a whole bunch of stuff in it.
Yeah.
That's the only way I got any of those records. I was not buying Dave Bowie albums, anybody I knew, or getting any of that kind of stuff from any of those people.
Was it like, because in Atlanta, I've seen like the news clips that the Sex Pistols show in Atlanta was like a news story. Like it was
The reason was that was their first show because it was a big city with no big pressure, but it had minor press, but it was still a big city. So Ozzy Osbourne did the same thing on his solo tour. A lot of people use Atlanta because it's easy to fly into and it's
Huge
the first
airport.
place.
Oh, yeah.
First, well, back then it was a different airport, but
It's a main hub.
it's one of the 5 biggest cities in the country.
Yeah.
Yet it wasn't a press hub.
Yeah.
So you could get the experience, work out your kinks, play in front of a huge crowd, get a little bit. My buddy Chuck Young wrote the first a Rolling Stone magazine the first day that they played. Rest in peace, Chuck, too, by the way. He just passed away, but he wrote the first article on the Sex Pistols in the States for Rolling Stone magazine from the Atlanta show when they first came in. But that was one of the few magazines that
would cover it.
Yeah.
Well, because like outside of Cream and Rolling Stone, were you guys hearing about punk in like other kids at school? No,
No,
just
there was nobody where I lived.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Nobody.
No.
Still nobody.
Yeah.
Maybe the one kid went and saw Devo,
Yeah.
and came back.
But he
with
lived in a much
flower
bigger
pot.
city than I did.
Okay.
Which
Aberdeen was
wasn't that time.
18,000 people. I lived in a town of 2,000 people.
Wow.
But
One stoplight.
Same thing. I mean, you couldn't find records like that on there. And the only way I saw those bands and knew about them was from same thing, Cream magazine. But I'd never heard them.
Yeah.
I was I bought all those magazines because of Kiss. Being 10, 11 years old, and it was like, I'd finish all the Kiss stuff and then look at these other bands. Like, oh, this is really weird. Blondie, huh?
Yeah, I loved all that stuff.
Right.
All of it.
But I didn't really hear any of it until maybe seeing Rock and Roll High School, and then seeing the Melvins play.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean that was the first punk rock band I ever saw.
That was your first band? Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what was your first punk rock? Playing in the Melvins?
Well, that and I saw TSOL. That was the first punk rock band I saw, and then what happened for me was that I realized that all this stuff was happening in and around Seattle.
Yeah.
And I lived a long ways. And when you're a teenager, especially at that point, if you lived 100 miles from a city, especially with my parents, I might as well have lived on the fucking moon.
Yeah. We were 2 hours away from Seattle.
I went to school with kids who'd never been to Seattle, whose parents had never been to Seattle.
Yeah.
They just didn't do it.
Yeah.
It was like, it might as well have been an iron curtain, So I didn't know anybody. I was on my own. And then I found a lot of things as time went on. Found a lot of other things like I got into the Stooges through the Sex Pistols cover of the Stooges, and then the MC5. It was just like, I'm really into like, what are they into? Mm-hmm. Why are they into this? What bands do they like? And I've never been one of these guys that was like, oh, well, I'm into what the kids are into. I always hated kids. I always hated teenagers. That didn't interest me. I was always into Hendrix. I was always into Cream. Always into Blue Cheer. Any of these bands from the 60s.
Yeah.
I always loved all that stuff. Still love all that stuff. So I've never been like, I'm into the scene, whatever the kids are into. Or I've always hated that kind of thing.
Was any of that Pacific Northwest psych stuff, like Syndicate of Sound?
No, I never heard any of it.
None of that stuff really?
Never heard any of it. Until I started going to shows. I started realizing it was happening up there.
Yeah.
Then I saw a bunch of bands that were really good. But I had to get to a situation, or a position where I was mobile. Mm-hmm. Until then, my parents were not driving me to a rock and roll concert. That was not happening.
My mom took me to Kiss, and then we talked her into taking us to Ted Nugent, and then after that, it was like, you're on your own.
Took me to Ted
Nugent. I'm not going to any more of these concerts.
That was it. So once I did that, and in the early '80s, once I finally became mobile, I turned 16. Then that was it, off and running. So by the time we met him, we were way into
everything.
Yeah, we just by association, finding these kinds of things, and lots of bands played in Seattle, and we went and saw as much as we could. And by that point, the time I was out of high school, I was not. I didn't really have a permanent place that I was anchored to. A lot of shitty jobs and stuff like that. And so we would go to as many rock concerts as we could, but I liked big and small concerts both. Mm-hmm. I would go see Van Halen and Black Flag in the same week. Stuff like that.
He also knew the reason why you shouldn't order sausage on your pizza.
Why's that?
Oops. Mm-hmm. You tell me.
Oh, because they leave it out too long.
Working at something. Don't ever order sausage from a pizza plate. Yeah.
I never knew that. I'm now going to never do that.
On what he was saying, though, the first time I went to a punk show with these guys is we went to Seattle and saw Spinal Tap play during the daytime, and then we went to a show at night, and it was like the FUs from Boston and
somebody else, I can't remember.
The Accused and somebody else.
So that's like a myth, because you always, in that movie Hype, they talk about it, and in a lot of the books about Seattle, it's always like, oh, no one came to Seattle, and that's why the sound developed here. But like,
bullshit.
FU's
but a lot of
not every band played there. Not every band, lots of bands. I saw lots of good bands play there.
But bands did skip it because it was way
so
up
far
there.
Up there.
There was,
between.
Well, I missed lots of bands because they never played up there.
Yeah.
But DOA and Black Flag and Subhuman, like there were certainly West Coast bands that did that circuit.
Unfortunately, DOA, yes.
Yeah.
The first show that I...
You can't say that in Canada?
I never liked those.
Oh, you can't say that in Canada.
I will go on record as saying that.
I think you just have.
Absolutely.
Actually, the first show that I ever played with the Melvins was opening up for DOA.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So you guys have a real Pacific Northwest connection to...
We do. They were never nice to us.
Really? Yeah.
No, not ever. Not ever nice. Not from day one. Not ever.
Do you think it was by that point they were already like kind of like a big quote-unquote band? Is that why? Or is it just like...
I always got the impression from those guys that they were just a bunch of assholes. Mm-hmm. All of them. Even the dead ones. I never got the impression that they were cool or were practicing any of the stuff that they ever talked about. Not from my experience. Up until those guys opened for us playing with Biafra, and they were still assholes. In 2005. Still, I couldn't believe that they were pulling the shit that they were pulling. So
yeah, I was like, we're gonna play a long set because this is our hometown, and we're gonna play as long as we want. We were gonna play after them, and it cut into Jello.
We had to be done by 10 or something because it was all ages place, and they didn't give a shit. It's like, okay, nothing's changed. Fuck you guys.
It must be weird now seeing these bands all these years later. I find it weird when I run into bands that I'm like, oh, weird. Like we started going at the same time, and like here you are. DOA still there, and you still have the same issue with them all these years later.
It's not me.
I don't mean you. I mean the same issues.
Yeah, exactly. I have the same thing happens. It's just over and over and over. I mean, I never had a good experience with those guys. Yeah. Never. Spent a lot of time in Vancouver, and never had a good experience with any of those people. Had a good experience with other people in Vancouver.
Well, thinking about other bands, what were some of the... Because the Melvins, I think, and Butthole Surfers, too, maybe the two of you are peers, but like they're... both bands without peers, like sonic peers at the time.
We weren't really peers back then because...
No, I know
we weren't.
No, I'm not saying... But I mean, like, if I was going to say, like, bands that both are connected because they don't have a lot of connections to the
Peers
sonic
meaning
sound.
there's no brother bands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I just can't, like, who would you guys, like, was there any bands, like, were you guys like, oh, we're friends with The Accused, or we're friends with any of these bands?
What about if you go to labels? So, like, there used to be a time where we would buy stuff because it came out on a label.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
SST
like
stuff. AT, SST, Touch and Go. If something came out on it, you're like, hey, I should check that out.
Yeah.
Because they don't put out shit I don't like, you know?
But
that's changed now drastically.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, and you guys, I think, reflective of the labels that you were on, always different labels, like, very few bands were on Atlantic Records and Slap-a-Ham, you know, or like very few bands were on Majors and indie Alternative Tentacles, you know, like there's like there's like this weird. Were there any bands that you guys felt like at the time, like, you know, now things have changed, there's a lot of bands influenced by
certainly there's bands that we were friends with that were peers or whatever, but I mean, there was always kind of a competitive element to it.
Always.
You know, always just like, you know, like, because we would totally fucking go in there and stomp the shit out of people, and we were competitive too. You know, that was our goal, was to go in there and fucking kick their ass.
I felt like those bands should be on the top of their game all the time.
Yeah,
and they always weren't.
And that's how
they weren't always that way.
We wanted to be, you know,
we wanted to be a pummeling monster.
Yeah,
You didn't care. Antisocial.
That was it.
You know,
because I think, like, I hear, like, you know, and it's now cliched, like the big influence on the Melvins is Black Flag and Black Sabbath. Like, it's like that's the thing that all journalists flow to.
Sure,
you guys were making harsher, heavier music than Black Flag was, but before those records were coming out, like the harsher, heavier later records, right? Like 83, 82, you guys.
Well, we were really into bands like Flipper.
Yeah,
I was always really into bands that were, you know, confrontational along those lines. Art Damage,
like Ism too. I guess would be like kind of like
you know,
East Coast.
Throbbing Gristle, that were being weird for weird's sake. Mm-hmm. Bottle Surfers were masters at that.
Oh, yeah.
Although with the Bottle Surfers, I always felt you guys were playing pop music.
Yeah,
you know, it had pop sensibilities.
Well, you know, Gibby definitely as Jello. We talked about the Brian Ferry influences, that stuff, and you know, and Paul was in the show band, not the jazz band, when he was a kid in school.
Show band.
Yeah, it was a show band. They played popular music.
Yeah,
they didn't play jazz stuff. So
you had those sensibilities.
So there's one trained, one that wasn't trained, that liked stuff that was out there, and you know, shows that they did before I was in the band that I've seen footage of that I love the most was, you know, Gibby coming out with a mouthful of Raisin Bran and singing and just shit flying out of his mouth. And, you know, it wasn't about the song per se, but, you know, it's easy to, like, put something that's easy to listen to for some reason behind it that kind of has a groove or something that's easy to listen to, and then throw something on top of it that doesn't quite make sense at first.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
that first EP they did was total pop. Great sounding songs that worked really well.
A lot of majors. There weren't like dissonant minor stuff per se. There was a lot of stuff done. If you look at a lot of that stuff, it's like there's really like feel good music. You know, that's a little twisted. You know, I mean, and so the way I see it, anyways, it was like you said, poppy. You know, it's easy to listen to.
Easy
for parts of it, and then there was another part that
but that's what made it good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's where the genius.
I don't think there was that much thought into that. I think it's just the way they were. You know, I mean, to me,
very natural.
I don't think there was any thought put into let's make something kind of poppy sounding with stuff that might be a little bit pushing the limits on some other end of it. You know, it's just something that kind of came natural.
Go ahead.
No. My thing was because you have both bands kind of take their rise and ascent and kind of come of age at a time when hardcore and punk rock is being very codified. Bands are, you know, a lot of bands are moving towards sounding similar. The rules are kind of going into place. In contrast to what you're saying about punk rock and how punk rock in the very beginning was. There's a lot of different Throbbing Gristle.
A lot of different things.
I love Throbbing Gristle.
Yeah,
Nurse with Wound.
Yeah.
Chris and Cozy's, you know, some coil stuff.
Yeah, and you
put some weird shit out.
And it's all like kind of under this giant punk quote unquote banner.
I never thought of that as punk though.
No, but
I always did.
Throbbing Gristle was a punk band.
Throbbing Gristle was. I mean,
well, like I was saying earlier, you know, it's like Black Flag, and then you got the Meat Puppets. Like, wow, you know, like two different complete.
Black
styles.
Flag understood that they were the same.
Under the same, you know, on the same label, under kind of the same umbrella. Like you're saying.
They got it.
And Seattle,
not everybody else did.
Seattle, I thought was kind of like that too, and we just kind of assumed that every place was like that until we did our first tour and realized that what you were saying, no, it was more like everybody wanted the same tempo song, same type of band, same.
That
same
really
way
pushed
dress.
us over the edge.
And people just fucking hated us.
They hated us.
I mean, not just like, oh, I don't like this band, I'm going to go outside. These guys fucking suck, and I want to kill them. That's the reaction that we got, you know, and it wasn't, you know.
Everywhere.
That was weird.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, just, you guys fucking suck, I want to kill you.
So what kind of shows were you like opening for, like, well, you mentioned the FUs and DOA, but by the time you're on tour, you just like playing with the local hardcore band in
Well,
each
this
city,
one particular tour that we did that was one of our very first ones was us on tour with a band called
RKL.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Looking for Dave.
He's someplace around here. I think we were actually friends with these guys from Calgary, Beyond Possession.
Oh, yeah.
And we would come up here and play with them, and then they'd come down to Seattle and we'd play shows with them. And we were going to do a couple shows.
How did that connection get made? Sorry not to cut you off.
We saw them in Seattle. Oh, no, I know
We
what
saw
it
them in
was.
Seattle.
Saw them
first
there.
off.
Oh, these guys are pretty good. And then we end up playing with them
in Vancouver.
Okay.
And we were staying at the DOA Punk House when they were there. And
Actually, DOA didn't live there at the time, but
they didn't. But that wasn't. That was their.
it was their manager lived there.
Oh,
That's a whole nother kettle of fish.
Okay. And I thought these guys that were talking like this were kind of talking like this on purpose. So I started talking like this too. And I'm like, hey man, what's going on? You know, not realizing
From
like
Calgary.
You're taking shots at the Canadian accent there. The Calgary accent.
We didn't know anybody from Calgary.
No, I bet. Well, that's the thing. It's like, especially.
From a heck town in the middle of nowhere. We didn't know anything.
No, we didn't know nothing.
Well, that's the first time that we hung out with you guys was in Calgary, and it's like amazing how that city has changed. Like I think being Beyond Possession at that time in Calgary would have been a real uphill swim.
They did good there.
Swim.
They did really good. They did a lot better there than we did.
Yeah.
People were not interested in our long-haired shit, I'll tell you that.
So we were going to do some shows with those guys from San Francisco down to
Beyond Reason. We always call it.
Intent to distribute.
Beyond Reason.
Their van blew up in San Francisco, and we ended up doing the shows, and RKL was on the bill, and they're like, well, they were going to do the whole tour with Beyond Possession. They're like, well, it's already set up for 2 bands. Why don't
Come
you guys
on
just
the tour.
along?
So we did.
Okay, and then
Nightmare.
And
A nightmare,
It
really.
was a nightmare. We thought they'd never tour again.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ever.
The van breaking down, like I said, every 30 feet. And
I'm just not. It was just a pointless waste of time. Everybody was a skinhead on that tour, and if anything submitted in my mind, that I wanted to be the exact opposite of that did.
Yeah.
I mean,
there was a few
it's
times.
like, you guys, whatever you're into, it can't be right.
It's not. I got to be the opposite.
Cannot be right.
That tour was all through the
I'm
South,
doing something
and then-
completely different because
And
you guys
then
are
up
so
the
wrong.
East Coast. The one town that people actually liked us, that's still one of our favorites.
New Orleans.
Yeah, it was New Orleans.
Really?
Yeah, they liked us
They
there.
liked
It
us
was like an
there.
oasis.
Yeah.
For us in
Because
the
it's like
South.
you don't really think of too many bands. Like at the Cold, Ellen DeGeneres' brother's band was from there, and Final Solution Records, I guess, was from there. But like, you don't really think of New Orleans as having a lot of bands at that point.
I don't know if they had a lot of bands, but there's a lot of people there that totally got what we were doing and have been fans and supportive since.
That's awesome.
We met
Crazy.
these guys that were in this band called Shell Shock.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And they were
Super nice guys.
They were big Kiss fans, and we had a big Kiss mural on the side of our van, and so they came up and started talking to us, you know, and then stayed friends with those guys. And,
Forever.
Yeah.
One of them's dead now.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy Bauer was in that band later, he's in
I Hate God.
I Got It Down.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, there's always been a connection there.
Shell Shock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he play on any of the records? Or
I don't know if he's on it. He might have been on that album.
the full length?
Yeah, he might have been on the album.
Wow, I
He might have been.
Yeah,
But they had a really great sense of humor that we liked.
Yeah.
Like, we knew we were, like, with that song, The Crank Calls, Crank It.
Yeah, Crank It.
So, and also, and we had heard about them, just reading about, you know.
I was roommates with their singer for a long time in San Francisco.
Oh, well, when you guys moved down there.
Yeah.
So, at this point, you guys kind of go back from these tours, and
That was it.
did you have any LPs out? Was the LP out?
We had, we had
we
a
had a 7-inch
EP.
out.
Oh, the first, just the
7-inch.
CZ.
That's it.
Yeah.
And everybody couldn't care less. It was just ridiculous. So I went home and immediately I worked on all that stuff that was on our first album.
Yeah.
Because I was just determined to do something that was completely the exact opposite.
So how did you...
As a reaction, I wasn't into that music at all.
Yeah.
Like, I was never an agnostic front or any of those bands. I never liked any of that stuff. It was okay, but I always was much more picky than most of punk rock people I was around, and I got a lot of that. from being picky to the first place. But then I also knew a lot of people in.
They're about to start. Just like,
a lot of people in.
1 minute.
A lot of people in Seattle, like Mark Arm from Mudhoney and Steve Turner, and those guys were picky too, and they were huge music fans, and it was good. It was good, as far as that's concerned.
Okay, can we pause now? I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they're pretty.
With dabs?
Yeah, I did want to put the up there one guy. I was trying to explain to him because he was asking me about it. I was like, well, I guess I was saying it's like doing a shot instead of drinking whiskey on the rocks. It's like you do a shot and it hits you real quick. Compared to like just sipping. But this is and the guy behind the counter goes, yeah, it's like smoking a joint. He was explaining to Dave. It's like smoking a whole joint in 1 minute by yourself.
My wife says it's like if you think of coffee like weed, this is the espresso.
Yeah.
It
puts you where you want to be without the whole social passing it around
and a lot of
smoking
carbon intake and
yeah.
But there's no CBDs in it. It's mainly just THC.
Yeah, it's just all crystals. Yeah.
I was touring off last year, and the opening band was this band Gay Kiss.
Yeah.
And I think the guitar player did I smoked something like that. It must have been something like that because they're just like, oh, you're going to be really high. And he was so out of it. And they're doing sound check. I was watching him and I was like, he just keeps playing his guitar and fucking with it and stuff. And the other guys would just kind of look at it and go, what's going on?
If you're not used to that.
Just laid down and he was freaking out a little bit. And Steve McDonald kind of talked him down.
Yeah. When you do edibles, it's kind of like edibles last for hours and hours. And it's like doing the edible peak of the edible stuff, but only for like a short period, like maybe 45 minutes. And then you just feel stoned.
So it sounds like after the show we got to check out these Toronto vaporizer bars.
Man.
I can't wait.
Buzz is first.
8 hours of self-introspection is something I don't need.
Did you ever smoke weed? Did you ever smoke?
I've smoked weed, yeah.
Yeah, but like never heavily or anything like that?
Oh, maybe when I was in high school.
I started shooting it up afterwards.
Yeah.
That's why I stopped.
I got the mainlining weed.
You've got
It's a little chunky, but you can do it.
You got to do it.
Yeah, it's really
tough
good.
to melt it
It's
down.
a nightmare on the veins, I imagine, though.
It made me paranoid, and I honestly, it didn't work that well for me.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys, Kroger and those guys would try to get me high.
Oh, yeah, he always
Just
said
be a little high.
Anything.
Don't feel too
Really?
much.
That's like fucking super weed. Really?
Kind of high.
It sounds like you need to try a dab.
Oh my God!
I'm not touching
Those
that. I'm not touching that.
I don't
I haven't done
think
anything in so long.
Yeah,
I'll straighten his hair out.
Yeah. I always say you don't want to get me. You don't want to get me.
hashing.
You don't want to get me drunk or high. I turn into a mean version of the guy from Blue Velvet.
You won't like me when I'm angry.
Well, my mother-in-law, one time, we were on vacation, and she, this was right when all those weed stores were opening up, and she somehow got like a bunch of enough to get you high for probably a month, like 20 people. And she ate a little something, and then her and my wife went to go shopping, and my wife's getting out of the car, and she heard her say something like, oh, I forgot, it takes a while to hit you. And didn't pay attention to what she was saying. And she's getting out of the car, and it's like, how come you're not getting out of the car? She's like, I can't move.
Too high.
Yeah. My mom did that. She asked for some of mine that I had. It was really tasty. And she's like, in her 70s and in her moo-moo. Not Buzz's moo-moo.
Hey.
I know, not that one. It was much lighter. Like a sundress of moo-moo.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so she's like, she goes, with all due respect, she goes, I'm fat. I need more. I'm like, Mama, you gotta wait.
You don't need more.
You gotta wait. And so I did the same amount she did. But the next day was my dad's surprise party for his birthday, which was a surprise to everyone because it was months before it was his actual birthday. And so she was so fucking stoned the next day that we had to have a story that said, my sister asked me, who's a preacher in Georgia, in Canton, Georgia, and she goes, what's wrong with Mom? And I said, they changed her meds up. That was our story.
They changed her
meds up.
And my mother-in-law said,
and my dad was like, please never do that to her again.
my mother-in-law said, I haven't been that high since Nixon was in office.
She would tell us stories. Marine's mom is really cool. She's actually really, really, really super nice. But I don't think 10% of what went on with her.
Yeah,
talks about going to the Troubadour with Jim Morrison,
hanging out with the Stones.
Wow.
She had a good story about Mick Jagger where she said that my girlfriends used to call him Pencil Dick.
So it's not him on the cover of
Cocksucker Blues?
Apparently not.
There's so much I could ask you guys. There's so much. But one of the things I've always wondered is where did the connection with like all those Bay Area and LA labels? Like I guess you moved down when you did the record on Slap-A-Hand, but Alchemy, when did
86, 87. We moved down to San Francisco.
So is that where you made connection with the people from Alchemy?
We drove down there and played a show that Victor Hayden from Alchemy, starting at Alchemy, saw us play in 85.
Yeah, it was at a warehouse called The New Method, and actually Scott from Neurosis used to live there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we met him really a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that happened. He saw us. And
this guy saw us.
It's like, shit, because we're really relatively discouraged fellows, but determined to just, we didn't care,
Turns out his uncle was Captain Beefheart.
Wow.
Yeah.
We didn't know that at the time.
No. Found that out later. He never talked about...
We never talked about anything. He was a total weirdo.
Weird artist.
That's how it happened.
It's a fantastic, it's like the label put out so much weird, different types of bands.
He kind of lost his mind.
Yeah.
And then he turned it over to somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I don't know what happened to him. He disappeared.
I don't know either. Yeah,
I think he was independently wealthy from family money. We don't know that, though.
Trout Math
I doubt from that. I doubt from those royalties. Yeah, hundreds of dollars roll in every year.
Yeah. Huge checks. So what about Slap-A-Hand? Like, was that, how'd you meet?
Well, we met Chris
in San Francisco.
San Francisco. He saw us play there someplace, and
was he in Noise for a Name at the time? I guess, or
I don't know.
Was he ever in that band?
Yeah, he played on the second 7-inch.
I don't think they had started yet. He was writing stuff for Maximum Rock and Roll. Did a big interview with us.
Okay.
He called him No Use for a Brain. That's what he called him.
But yeah, we became friends with him.
He had the same sense of humor that we did. We always had, like the Fugs type of sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
We thought that kind of stuff, absurdity, was funny.
Mm-hmm.
We loved it. Plus, he wasn't that serious.
Yeah.
And he's one of the few guys at Maximum Rock and Roll that we could get along with. Everybody else down there, I thought were a bunch of dicks, especially Timmy O'Hannon, first and foremost. That guy's
he didn't like our band.
No, he didn't like our band, and he was just he's into everything except music. And if anything drove us was that we had to make better, we had to do something that was better than this with this idea. Because these guys have to be wrong. Once again, they cannot be right about this.
Well, what was the point when you started finding, like, the audience, like the
Ozma?
Ozma. That's when it all changed. Really?
That's when it changed. Yeah.
Because it's incredible when you think about the bands that you guys influenced for a band that had to fight so long to kind of find.
Well, we had nothing else going on, and me and Dale we worked crappy jobs our whole existence until, and we were like, well, we can work crappy jobs anywhere. Why stay in Washington? There's nothing for us in Washington. We could do a show with Green River and Soundgarden and advertise it for a month or more and not get 25 people at the show.
There's a lot to say about persistence. Look at the Goo Goo Dolls.
Yeah. Let's look.
And then we had done our first record in San Francisco and kind of liked it down there, It'd be a cool place to go.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time in Seattle. There was nothing for us in Seattle. And I just had no interest.
Did you guys fit in with that, I guess, I don't know if it was named at the time, but that emerging kind of power violence, like bands like No Comment, Infest? Did you ever play with any of those bands?
I never saw any of those bands. When we moved there, it was all speed metal bands like that were influenced by Metallica or Exodus. Or goofy punk rock stuff that we had no interest in.
Yeah.
Like, let's make a mess on stage, but have terrible music. Just stupid. And the Gilman Street thing was starting, and that was super toot-ish.
Did you guys ever play there?
We did.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, we think the band and the audience is the same. So you guys should have to, when you play a show, you should have to sweep up. Like, okay, look, here's the difference between the band and the audience. We spent all week fucking rehearsing. Those guys spent all week drinking beer. Right. There's a fucking difference. And you guys don't see a difference? Fuck you.
But they wanted us to
We're doing our part by being a band.
They wanted us to come down there and kind of work, help out, sweep the floors, this whatever.
So all the time we put in, that's not good enough. That means nothing at all. It's like, fuck off. I never understood that. That doesn't make any sense to me.
But you guys do have that drive, and like any band has kind of built their own world. Is that...
Well, what I didn't like was that they were trying to tell us it was worth nothing.
Yeah.
That some stiff who did nothing all week was the same as me who worked on my craft all week. There's a difference to me. It's like with the Butthole Surfers or Fucked Up or anybody. You guys worked on what you're doing. It didn't just happen. It's not a mistake.
Did they still
just fall into it,
back then, did they take you into the office and divide up the money that came in at the Gilman?
There was no money. We played a show. One of our first shows that we played there was with the Adolescents, and the Adolescents were not having any of that.
Oh, yeah.
And they gave us like $200. We were like, yes, $200. But if Johanna would have had his way, that place would have been closed. Mm-hmm. It never would have worked out. You can't do that to people that are like the Adolescents drive up from L.A. They're not making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They were really good. They were really good that night. And then to go in there and tell them that they have to pick up brooms and sweep the place, it's like, fuck you. They're not asking for anything. They came and did an amazing show. Mm-hmm. That's enough. Mm-hmm. Give them a break. Yeah. They weren't having it. They were just like, this is bullshit. It is bullshit. We're going to bring you guys, you rock stars down a notch. Just like, okay, I rehearsed and worked at a fucking pizza place. Fucking blow me. All week. Blow me. You're going to make me feel like, put me in my place. Like, I don't already know that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I was totally not into it. At all. The whole mentality, I thought it was all bullshit. Those guys are out of their minds,
So what kept you there? Was it the weather? Was it just like the vibe there in San Francisco? Or
I love San Francisco. I thought it was great. I love the city itself. I loved just wandering around. I loved all of the whole history of it. I loved all the beat stuff. I loved North Beach. We loved reading and just we would just drive around. We would rehearse, and then me and Dale would say, "Okay, let's take the scenic route home."
Oh yeah.
We did it over and over and over. Yeah. Drive all over the place, just looking at. We never lived in a city.
Yeah,
right.
We were like Mickey Mantle when he went to New York for the first time.
Yeah.
From some shithole. It was. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved restaurants that were open 24 hours a day. I loved being able to do things that we never would have been able to do.
What was that place we used to go to? Video Cafe?
Video Death Camp, we called it.
Late night cafe place, not too far from where we were.
And we didn't have a lot of money for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it was fun. It was really fun. I loved living there and that whole aspect of all that kind of stuff. We lived really close to where Anton LaVey lived. We thought that was cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember walking around the neighborhood. I mean, we lived in a relatively safe neighborhood in San Francisco. And I remember walking at night and looking at this house and going, who the hell needs like an 8-foot high barbed wire fence in this neighborhood?
On this black house.
I didn't notice the black house with the spikes sticking out of it, and that the barbed wire was pointing in, like keeping something in,
And then you'd see him at the drugstore, big huge earring in, walking around buying supplies
just
for his
like
house.
a sailor.
Jesus, yeah.
That's
Anton LaVey.
Buying cat food and toilet paper.
Totally.
I mean, that was Danzig.
But the same kind of stuff,
Similar vibe, though.
Except Anton LaVey was, as cartoony as he was a lot scarier than Danzig.
Yeah. Well, he apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but someone told me once he was the only theremin player in the musicians union at the time.
Could be. I mean, he's from the Carney.
Yeah.
He's a Carney, so that's how much serious that any of that devil worship stuff is. It's funny. It's a good story,
And those parties sounded pretty crazy that they used to have, those rituals.
Oh, I'm sure he had a good time.
Yeah, great time.
I think the Scorpions bass player was in one of them.
And plus, I loved walking around Haight Street and meeting fucking weirdos I'd never met before. Like there was this crazy transvestite cab driver that I knew, and just all kinds of weird people that were that we were never around. When we went to Seattle, we were around that kind of stuff. But to live in a place like that, I loved it. I didn't hate anything about San Francisco. Nothing.
Did you find that normal, like the normal town that you came from, creepier in a way than
much creepier,
like dangerous quote unquote streets of San Francisco?
Oh, I had a much easier time in San Francisco. I could breathe there.
Plus, there's plenty of stuff to do, movies, all kinds of stuff.
You can't be too weird there.
Yeah,
it's not possible. I don't know what you'd have to do to weird people out there. I like that. Now I live in LA, and I like LA even more. It's even weirder. Yeah. But I always really like that stuff. I mean, punk rock, anything that's good in my life, anything that's good, from my wife to my house to anything, is all as a result of music. Mm-hmm. All as a result of discovering punk rock. Mm-hmm. And doing it in a way that was not like everybody else.
Well, I could, as I say, keep going, and I want to probably interview each of you individually at a certain point, but you have to get on stage. Well,
we don't. We have an opening.
We have to... Listen,
the butcher answer what you have to say.
But it sounds way better for the audience if it seems like you guys are doing this podcast at the moment.
You literally have 1 minute.
I know, 1 minute to the wrap
be on in 1 minute.
Okay. Let's see if they come on in 1 minute, Jeff.
Let's see. So we're super happy to be playing with Jeff. Jeff understands what we're doing.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about that. He gets it, and we think that's great. And we really appreciate the fact that you get what we're doing.
Oh, no. Like,
and we really appreciate the fact you guys did that 12-inch.
Believe me, that for us, like...
That was cool.
The first interview Fucked Up ever did, ever, was this kids fanzine that never came out. And they're like, what bands do you want Fucked Up to be like? And we're like, Poison Ivy and the Melvins. And it was like... So doing that split, like, 13 years later,
that's great.
Was like... that was my stamp. Like,
Metal Servers did one of those, too.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
There's a store in Toronto. They're late. Well, now we got bonus time.
They're usually not late.
So anyway, thanks a lot.
Let's talk about Montage of Heck now.
Oh, no.
Perfect timing.
Perfect.
I think I said all I needed to say.
I think the mic dropped on that one.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.